Voytek. Janisz is an enterprise architect at Progressive Insurance, where he's responsible for overall strategy of the evolution of the enterprise architecture practice. He led initiatives to standardize the approach for describing enterprise architecture, to establish architecture governance, and to utilize architectural information across all IT disciplines. Voytek's background includes strategy development, systems engineering, and application development. So I'll hand it over to you.
Thank you. Can you hear me okay? All right. Good afternoon. This talk is about practical approach to integrating enterprise architecture. So it is sort of a reflection on the journey that Progressive as an organization and the enterprise organization within Progressive started about 2 years ago. And since enterprise architecture journey never ends, this journey continues. So I'm hoping that by sharing with you some of these experiences, you guys can. Sorry. Better? Is it better? Oh, that was better. Okay, so I'm hoping that by sharing this with you, you guys can pick up some ideas, perhaps transplant some of those ideas into your environments, especially if those environments are those of a larger enterprise. Or if not, at least maybe you can avoid certain challenges that we had to deal with. So before we start, though, I wanted to pause on the term of enterprise architecture. 3 definitions. I really don't expect you to read them or analyze them. Just pick one. But the reason why I'm bringing this up is you may notice there's a certain theme here. Vision, strategy, key principles and models, principles, methods, models, fundamental organization, principles governing. The reason I even bring this up because I wanted to draw this distinction between the software architecture, which deals primarily with the inner workings of the app or a system, whereas the enterprise architecture really deals with the larger scope of things, the scope being the enterprise. And also in context of the enterprise architecture, we're dealing with 3 types of architectures, if you will. Business architecture, information systems architecture, as well as technology architecture. So it's much more comprehensive. There's also 2 fundamental concepts that I wanted to bring up in context of this discussion and in context of the enterprise architecture. First is the concept of a current state architecture. So the current state architecture really is the description of architecture as is. And so the fundamental organization of the system, the relationships between those components. But the main characteristic is obviously that it's discoverable. You can touch it, you can feel it, you can smell it, you can at least in theory discover it. And then there's this concept of a target architecture, which is essentially a conceptual future state that you can't discover because it doesn't exist. It's conceptual. However, you should be able to describe it. You should be able to describe it in a standard way. But why target architecture, not just a future architecture? Well, when I talk about target architecture, what I mean by that is the future state for which a certain level of agreement has been met. So it's really not a pie-in-the-sky type deal, like, well, we want to do something in the future, but we really don't know how to get there. So it really has to represent a certain level of agreement and also has to be describable, and you have to be able to build a plan around this. So you need to be able to build a plan how to get from this current state to a target state. Okay? So we got that out of the way. So let me tell you a little bit about our company. So Progressive Insurance, for those who live in the US, I'm sure this doesn't need any introduction. Turn on the TV. Chances are in 15 minutes you'll see Progressive commercial. For those who are not from the US, well, we are best known as one of the leading providers of car insurance. And we are a large organization. Our IT department alone is about 3,000 people strong. We have about 100 people who carry a official title of an architect. We have solution architects, we have data architects, we have enterprise architects, and we have domain architects. So obviously each architect has a different area of responsibility. Solution architect responsible for delivery of projects. Enterprise architects focusing more on strategic type transformational initiatives plus the strategy development. Data architects focus on data architecture, and the domain architects are really responsible for different areas of the enterprise, for the overall architectural health of the enterprise. So we do have 25 architecture domains. So like I said, those are the areas of the enterprise that are distinctive in some way architecturally. The best way to think about it is that they're loosely coupled with certain capabilities. So in the insurance world, Those capabilities are like claims processing or policy servicing or billing or quoting. So those are the examples of the architectural domains. And remember, like I said, in those architecture domains, we're dealing with business architecture, application architecture, data architecture, as well as the technology architecture. We have 5 architecture boards. One of them is the Enterprise Architecture Board, which is the overarching board that's dedicated to reviewing initiatives that really mean to transform the enterprise. And we have 4 architecture review boards, which are grouping certain architecture domains together based on their dependencies, architectural dependencies. We have about 800 what we call applications, and I use this term loosely. Think of it as the architecturally significant parts of the system. So it's a fairly large number. And we have about 400 architecturally significant projects that we're dealing with every year. And what I mean by that, those are the projects that either consciously or unconsciously change our architectures. So this is the pipeline. This is really what we keep looking at, making sure that they're aligned with our overall strategies. So we are a large organization. As a large organization, we have our challenges, and I'm sure your organization don't see those problems. So let me talk about this one. So obviously, many systems who are interconnected over time, evolving in different silos. And they were evolving in one silo sometimes. Well, little consideration was given how this evolution affects other systems in a different part of the organization. Some of those systems are not very well described. Okay? A lot of this knowledge resides in people's heads. When those are described, they're described sometimes inconsistently. What makes it difficult then, it's how do you put together all those system descriptions so they line up and you can actually look at the overall picture of the enterprise from there. Very difficult. Now, even if they are described consistently somehow, how do you find this information? It's scattered. It's scattered across the enterprise. And what this leads to is a couple of problems. I mean, it leads to many problems, but a couple of problems off the top of my head. Efficiency in solution delivery. For instance, some projects basically start with the archaeological dig. You go, you start a project, and the first thing you ask yourself, okay, I wonder what the system really looks like. Maybe you find some piece of information, some documentation, you look at it, and you wonder, the first thing you wonder, how old is this? Is this still accurate? Right? Does this sound familiar at all to anybody? I hope it does. Well, I don't hope it does. I hope it doesn't, but I know it does. Okay, another problem with this, so the same problem with the architecture descriptions for the current state architecture can be really projected to the target architecture. If we can't reliably describe what our targets are, how can we really expect that we are committed to those targets, that the solutions really are getting us closer to the targets? How we can expect that the business really is committed to the targets that they said they wanted, a year ago? So very challenging. So let's see. So we deal with those challenges in many different ways. First, we go after consistency. So using TOGAF, architecture development methodology, as a guide, what we did, we tried to identify the processes and the information that we needed to mature very fast. So when we did, we looked at the TOGAF ADM, and then we concluded that, we do have some level of maturity in some of those processes. They're probably not very TOGAF-y yet, but do they really have to be? But in some areas, we are really lacking. So in some areas, we had to enhance processes significantly, and in the other areas, we only had to adjust existing processes by injecting architecture information into them. So we focused on the target architecture definition project, our target architecture definition process. And for that, we really followed the first prescription from the first 4 phases of TOGAF ADM. So the process starts with the definition of the architectural vision. So we go through that process. We document everything in a standard template provided by TOGAF. Of course, we customized it. After that, we follow through iteration between B, C, and D, the definition of the business architecture, data architecture, application architecture, and technology architecture. We iterate through that, and then deposit all that information in the architecture definition document, also a template provided by TOGAF. After that, we wanted to go a step further. We wanted to also evaluate potential architecture alternatives. So TOGAF also guides you how to do that. And after that, we kind of jumping into the area of E and F phases of ADM, where we wanted to spend a little time on implementation plan and road mapping. So for that, we actually develop a sequence of logical items, work items that we need in order to develop the target architecture, to move the target architecture from a current state, to move the architecture from the current state to the target state. Okay, so again, and we deposit that information in a template, derived from where? From TOGAF, ADM. Now, I don't know if you've seen those TOGAF, and I know Chris is here, so I feel a little weird saying that, but some of those templates look like they're designed by committee. So it's like everything in there, right? And you're saying yes. So we had to customize them. We had to customize those templates. We basically say, hey, we operate in certain ways, and let's try to understand the intent behind this section in this document or that document, and well, let's make sure that this works for us. So we're not necessarily trying to bend our processes in our organization to TOGAF, but we did this the other way around. So now we have those documents. We have the vision document, we have ADD, we have implementation plan, we have roadmap. And this becomes a nice package for a formal approval of the target. This was very important to us because we wanted those targets to mean something. Remember, the definition of the target architecture has to represent some level of agreement. So two-step approval. First, architecture review board to make sure that the architecture is sound from the architecture standpoint. And then the second step, business approval. This is when we get the promise for funding. Very important. Because if nobody really wants to pay for this now or in the future, then, well, it's just a pie in the sky. It's just somebody's dream. So after we have that commitment, then pretty much the architecture work reflected through our roadmap enters the work prioritization funnel when it competes for funding, for the actual funding, with other work requests. And from there, we go to the architecture implementation, for which we follow the process we already had, which is the standard SDLC process, which we obviously augmented with the architecture information. Now, in order to manage all these artifacts along the way, we had to implement some processes around the managing of those artifacts. So along the lines of the target definition or architecture implementation, we had those checkpoints where the architecture artifacts will have to be updated. I'll talk about this a little bit more in a second. Let's see, enterprise architecture repository. We started with the SharePoint side. The SharePoint side was the entry point for all things architecture, was pointing us to the reference models, industry standards, best practices, that kind of thing. Over time, we developed a set of catalog. It was a custom tool, really, that the idea was there to catalog some of the building blocks, some of the components that we would like to use for our architecture definition, architecture development, architecture descriptions. And we also attached the life cycle information that Chris talked about to those components. So is it okay to use it, or is it about to be retired, or is it already retired? But the real breakthrough came with the introduction of the central model repository, for which we use the very competent modeling tool, Spark's Enterprise Architect. It was attractive to us for a couple of reasons, for actually 3 reasons, I think, main reasons. One, it supported Archimate, which is the notation that we standardized on several years back. Number 2, it allows teamwork. So you can have different individuals pretty much updating the models at the same time. That was very, very powerful. The main attractive feature was the fact that it allows a database backend. And why this is attractive to us? Because it allowed us to move away from thinking about the architecture as a set of pictures. It basically allowed us to start thinking about architecture descriptions as data. Data that can be mined, data that can be queried, data that can be reported on. Very, very powerful concepts. The models that we stored in our central enterprise architecture model were very high level, enterprise level models. But from there, you can reference more detailed architecture models, more solution type architecture models, or business process models, or data models. So it gives an opportunity. You don't have to put everything in right away, but it gives you a way to reference external information. So what kind of models did we store in that enterprise model repository? Well, when we first introduced Archimate maybe 4 years ago, we basically said, well, here's Archimate, please start building models. And we're so naive, we thought that after a while, the models will basically emerge and we'll be able to put them together. We'll have the enterprise model. No, didn't happen like that. We got a lot of very nice models, very rich. People were very creative, but we realized there's no way to stitch them together to form the enterprise models, because people were creative. People were naming things. People were interpreting things. People were using different relationships to mean different things. Very difficult. So what we decided, we had to narrow it down. We basically said, you know what? We need to focus on some key concepts. And the concepts that we picked where in the business layer, business process, and the role that acts on that process. Then in the application layer, well, just one blue component, application component. So architecturally significant piece of software, piece of technology that has a clear ownership. You can attach a cost to it, but it has very well-defined architectural boundaries. So that's probably the best way to think about it. And in the green layer technology, we focus on the concept of a node, which think of it as a bundle of configuration. So bundle of system software, bundle of devices. Example, I don't know, SQL Server class 3. Or something like that. So this would be an example of a node. So basically, bundles of configuration. We also have a concept of an artifact that we use to show critical databases or data stores. So you look at this and you think like, well, is that it? That's pretty simple. How useful can this be? Well, and this is what we heard when we started this. But after building 500 diagrams, and dropping essentially like 17,000 connections between those blocks. And it's not because we could, it's because we had to describe the whole enterprise. Basically, people changed their mind. It turned out that there is a lot of complexity that you can describe even at this level. But most importantly, what this allows us to do is allow us to answer very fundamental questions. Questions that are fundamental to us and questions that the business asks of us. So for instance, what business processes we have? Who acts on those business processes? How are they related? Part of the business architecture. Which apps support those business processes? Maybe some of them are very critical. We need to know which apps support those critical processes. And then we have those apps who are related to each other. I want to know which app this app depends on. Right? Very critical, because you may have to define your test strategy, for instance, or you need to plan accordingly when you modify one. You need to know what's impacted. And of course, which technology supports a given application. So important concept also that we introduced with this meta model, nothing goes into the enterprise model unless it's cataloged first. And this is this side of the picture here. We have this concept of data stewardship. So everything that goes into the enterprise level model has to be cataloged first and described. And we have a person who's a gatekeeper for all those catalogs. We call them data stewards. So very important concept. So in other words, the way this works is somebody wants to change what a certain application component's name is or some metadata associated with that application component, wants to add a new one. It has to go to the data steward first. Data stewards knows who are all the stakeholders of that particular information. And it kind of facilitates the impact analysis, if you will. Now, after everything is okay, the data gets added to the catalog and can be included in the model. So it's a very tight process, but it inspires confidence. At least that's what we've learned. So one of the questions that was on everybody's mind and everybody was nervous about is how do we keep all of this fresh? Right? Because it's very nice to do it once, but then a few months pass, all of this gets out of date. And, well, people stop trusting it. So I call this circles of trust. I used to have the nearest picture in there, but I figured the people would be better. So in the middle of the circles of trust is our integrated enterprise model. And the inner circle, dedicated architecture services team. So we have a team that is dedicated to making physical changes to the repository. Think of this team as quality control and publishing. So quality control in terms of data integrity. So nothing goes that can potentially break our enterprise models. So we have some quality checks, we have some scripting, we have some jobs, some processes that ensure that data quality. Nothing goes in if it breaks something else. Very important. And also the data stewards who manage the access to the catalogs, which I already mentioned. The middle circle is the domain architects and the architecture review boards. They are the owners of the information. So they decide what goes in from the conceptual standpoint. Like the inner circle architecture services, they don't pass judgment whether architecture is good or bad. The middle circles, they do, because this is where the knowledge is. They decide whether this target architecture needs to be updated, how it needs to be updated. They decided whether the current state architecture needs to be updated as a result of a solution completion or something like that, right? So this is where the knowledge is. They decide, they review it with the board, they discuss it within the board, and then they signal the inner circle to actually make the updates. And then there is an outer ring, which is the whole architecture community. Not just people who carry architecture title, but pretty much everybody, any consumer or producer of architecture information. So we rely on those people to, again, if they find something in being incorrect, we count on them to bring this forward to the domain architect so they can make the corrections. But we don't just rely on their goodwill to do that. We have certain checkpoints in our delivery processes when we mandate that they actually go and have this conversation with the domain architects or architecture review boards and really facilitate the currency of that information. How are we doing on time? We're doing okay? All right, good. Well, so let me summarize. We learned a lot. We learned a ton while establishing this framework. And we learned a ton when we actually used this framework and modeled our enterprise that way. So some lessons learned that I'm trying to summarize here. Know what you want. Know what you want from the enterprise architecture. And this sounds silly, but everybody knows what enterprise architecture really is, to help business, to be partnering with business, to do the strategy, do all those really lofty things. But what I really mean here is have a goal. Know what you want the architecture for today or tomorrow. It's really about the short-term benefits, not just the long-term benefits. Extremely important. Like in our case, the short-term benefit that we're trying to realize with this was really to facilitate more efficient delivery of solutions, because this is what business cares about now. And another reason why the short-term benefits are so important, because if you deliver on those, then you're building political capital that allows you to move the architecture forward further. And this is very important, because if you take 2 years to develop the architecture practice, and business will be looking at you spent all that money, what are you really giving me? So it's very important to get some real wins. Be mindful about how much you can measure. So this goes to our modeling, the meta model. Well, there's always this temptation, let's go deeper, right? This is not giving me enough information. We need more detail. Well, sure, that's very nice, but can you actually manage that information reliably so it doesn't get out of currency? This is a very challenging topic, but you really need to look at that from the cost-benefit analysis. So it's not just about benefits. It's very easy to say, oh, if I can do this, I should be able to make better decisions. How much is it going to cost you? Is it really worth it? So be very careful. I mean, it depends on where you are in the maturity of your EA organization. Just use your judgment, but be mindful that this is a concern. Build an existing foundation if possible. You already have processes. You already have probably some maybe starting point for the architecture repositories. Build on that. Don't try to change everything right away, because change is expensive and it's difficult. So try to do that. Establish taxonomy first, language, common building blocks. Decide how to name them. Have the enterprise-wide agreement of what those processes are and how they're called, what those application components are and what they're called, and catalog them. It's very important that we use the same language. And this does not just apply to the architecture space, but try to use the same language that the business would use. Try to use the same language that we would use in the configuration management space, in the operations space, because you want to use this language across other IT disciplines, not just in the architecture space. Establish information ownership and governance. Make sure you have those tight controls over the items that basically constitute the fundamental blocks of your architecture descriptions. So without that, well, it's easy to lose trust. And some control over change inspires trust. It's about information, not about the tool. So invest in the information. We did, and we think we made the right decision. Sparks Enterprise Architect, again, I'm not endorsing the tool, but it's very cheap. Okay, and you store the information in a very portable way. One day, when we mature enough to get to the full-blown Cadillac tool, like True, Mega, or Alphabet, or something like that, maybe we'll move there, maybe not. But at least we're positioned to move that way because we invested in the information in a portable form. And the last, but not least, it is about people. Nobody likes change, but people will lie about it. Of course. It's like, I don't like change. Well, I do like change, but as long as it's Stephanie who has to change, not me, right? So it's really that kind of attitude. And we see this a lot, right? And it's very pervasive. So what we really try to do, and what really helped us, is two things. One, executive support. So get support from the executive level. This has this power of focusing minds when you have written into your job objectives that you will use this architectural information in your day-to-day activity, and you will be evaluated on this. You will help build this framework. It does help, but unfortunately, this is just the stick part of the carrot and stick combo. So it doesn't work all the way. So you need this other side of things. So what is the solution for the other stuff? Well, it's the communication. Really is communication. Make this personal. Make this personal for people. Explain to people how this will help you as a tester, how it will help you as an architect, how it will help you as a program manager, requirements analyst. You name it. There is a scenario that you can come up with for each one of those roles, and you can explain how this will help them. If they understand how this will help them, they will start coming up with new uses for them. They will become your advocates. So again, communicate. Very important. With that, that's all I had. So I don't know if we have time for questions, Stephanie, or not.
We have a couple minutes, real quick. So does anybody have a question?
First question, you have developed all enterprise architecture in Archimate. How many elements are there? And is it possible to evaluate architecture quality? Or another one, are you dividing this architecture of segments?
Yes,
business?
yes.
In which way you deal with the huge architecture?
Yeah, so it is huge. We're talking about thousands of elements that we dropped in the diagram, and I think I said over 17,000 connections. So it is huge. We have this group by architecture domains, which works for us very well because we also have the ownership of those models and the components that constitute those models. They're owned by those different architecture domains, with dedicated domain architect kind of responsible for that area. So we have the ownership really partitioned by architecture domains. But the beauty of this is, again, this is the database behind the scenes that, even though you can be looking at the diagram that describes a certain part of the enterprise, behind the scenes, all the connections to the other parts of the enterprise are made. So it's really up to you. You can create now multiple views for the whole enterprise. But you don't have to be looking at the one big picture of the enterprise, but you have the data behind it. So you basically use the tool. And the tool actually has a pretty powerful, well, I don't want to say powerful, it is a decent reporting mechanism and decent analysis mechanism. So does that help? Any other questions?
Hi guys, so this architecture become very, very complicated, and you already said it's around a few thousand lines and everything else. So how do you ensure that what you're developing, actually, when you get to the point where you're actually developing the code or developing the system, how are you enforcing this and how are you validating that it's actually compliant with your architecture?
So very good question. This is probably need another 30 minutes to fully describe this, but let me try. So we have the whole process of architecture, of system delivery, of solution delivery, right? Along those lines, we have architectural checkpoints. We call them architectural reviews. So when the solution comes for the review, they are required to demonstrate how they are aligning with the enterprise architecture targets. So in the process of describing how they do that, they are required to point to certain things in our enterprise architecture models, if you will. So for instance, they say, oh, I'm operating in this space where this app touches that app, where I'm replacing this level of technology. And they can flesh out all the details in their solution descriptions. But it's really through the SDLC and the architectural review gates along the way. Does that help?
Do you guys using agile development or you just waterfall?
We have a combination, if you will. So we have like a front loaded, a lot of planning, and then we do iterative based on agile. It's not pure agile.
So how long the cycle? So how long does it take for development to develop something before the architect actually goes and reviews?
We have actually two architectural gates that are mandated, and then at any point in time, if the solution architect deems that there's architectural changes that are being done as part of iterative development that are happening, at any point in time, the solution architects can choose to go back to the architecture review board and review it. So it's really at the discretion of a solution architect.
All right, that's probably all the time we have for questions, and we can handle some more questions. Yeah, come see Chris.
Here's my contact. If you have any other questions, I'll be happy to continue this conversation.
So why don't we give Chris a nice warm round of applause.